Three men were jailed for life after shooting Ricky Berry dead. The 36-year-old, who was known as Nuggy, died after being shot 3 times by a balaclava-clad assailant on an electric bike outside his girlfriend's house in Kirkby on July the 17th last year. Michael Smith, Adam Williams and Connor Walsh were unanimously convicted of his murder last week following a trial at Liverpool Crown Court. They were also found guilty of a further count of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life by a jury of 8 men and 4 women and returned to the same court to be sentenced. Gunmen Smith and Williams, who drove a car which travelled in convoy with the man on the e-bike, were handed life sentences with a minimum term of 31 years behind bars. Walsh, whose DNA was recovered on a bullet casing recovered from the scene and was carried in the back of a vehicle, received a life imprisonment with a minimum of 30 years. None of them showed any reaction as they learned their fate. Sentencing, the honorary recorder of Liverpool Judge Andrew Menery KC said, "You have each been convicted by a jury on clear evidence of the murder of Ricky Berry. The circumstances in which Mr. Berry was killed are entirely straightforward, but no less disturbing for that. It was crystal clear from the CCTV footage that captured the events, and the jury found by their verdicts that all 3 of you were working together and you were jointly involved in this attack. You were all at the scene for a purpose, and that purpose was to shoot and kill Mr. Berry. It is not possible for me to determine why Mr. Berry was shot. He was plainly the intended target, but what the motive was has never been clearly identified and remains a big mystery. It would be tempted to conclude that it had something to do with drugs because all 3 of you, to a greater or lesser extent, were involved in the supply of Class A drugs, but equally it might have had to do something with the dispute that had nothing to do with that activity. You all obviously know why you thought he deserved to die, and others may know or suspect why it happened, but I cannot guess what the reason was. Whatever it was, it did not justify shooting someone dead, and it was ultimately a futile response because it has achieved nothing other than the destruction of one life and the destruction of the futures of all your lives and your families. What I do know, and I'm sure about, is that the 3 of you, maybe with others, spent some time that day planning what was effectively an execution. He was trapped in the doorway with nowhere to go when he was shot at close range. He said this was, in every sense, a cold-blooded, premeditated slaying made all the more outrageous by the fact that it happened in broad daylight on a quiet residential street where families live and children play. He said you obviously had no regard for Ricky Berry, and you also had little regard for anyone else you put at risk. The 4 shots were aimed not just at your victim, but also by definition in the direction of the house behind. In that house at the time were 2 young adults and 2 young children, and at least 3 of the bullets whistled on through the kitchen of that property where Mr. Berry's partner was doing a friend's hair, so it is only by good fortune that there were not other casualties. He showed reckless arrogance similar to the lawlessness of the Wild West. You simply didn't care and thought that some colder silence would protect you, but you didn't reckon on the diligence and efficiency of the subsequent police investigation. So Williams, who's 26 from St. Helens, admitted being the driver of a black SUV which travelled in convoy alongside the gunman Smith at the time of the drive-by attack. He came minutes after the 2 men, and Walsh, who was present in the back of the car at the time of the shooting, had performed a reconnaissance mission on the address where their victim was working in the front yard. Both Williams and Walsh, who were 26, denied acting in tandem with the shooter and claimed to have had no knowledge of any planned execution. The man behind the wheel maintained that he had stopped his vehicle outside Mr. Berry's home moments before the e-bike rider appeared and shot him dead after another of his passengers allegedly reported that the dad had shouted in their direction. Walsh's DNA was also found on one of the bullet casings recovered from the scene and the magazine of the firearm. Later the same evening, the 26-year-old Walsh took the bike ride back to the scene of the crime alongside his 7-year-old son and 13-year-old nephew. Smith pleaded guilty to the lesser offence of manslaughter and possession of a firearm with intent to cause fear of violence midway through the trial after his co-accused submitted revised defence statements naming him as the rider of the electric bike. The 25-year-old then denied to give evidence to the jury, although his counsel submitted that his intention could have been to frighten Mr. Berry rather than harm him during his closing speech. His counsel, Michael Brady Casey, told the court today that his client has a long-term partner and 2 young children, and he's still a relatively young man. The defence for Walsh said this is a unique case for him in that he has no previous convictions at all and he is still somewhat young. It is unusual that the first conviction will lead to a life sentence in any defendant's case. However, the outcome is, as we've heard at the start of this video, that these 3 men have been jailed for life after shooting Ricky Berry dead. Just want to say rest in peace, Ricky, and my condolences go out to your family. And guys, in this next news story, 2 men have been convicted of murder as detectives appeal to the public for help to locate an outstanding suspect. David Walcott, who's 35, of Norbury, and Ramon Marley, who's 33, of Croydon, were found guilty of the murder of Ricard Siafa on Wednesday the 26th of February at the Old Bailey following a 5-week trial. Walcott was also found guilty of possession of an offensive weapon. A murder investigation was launched after police were called to reports of a man stabbed in Croydon on Friday 12th of April 2024. A number of members of the public attempted to provide first aid before police and an ambulance service and under their ambulance arrived at the scene. Sadly, despite their efforts, Ricard died at the scene only 30 minutes later. In court, Walcott and Marley claimed that they were present but not the ones that had stabbed Ricard. However, they were unanimously found guilty of murder by the jury. Detective Chief Inspector Samantha Townsend from the Met Specialist Crime Command said, "Our thoughts very much remain with Ricard's family and friends who've had to relive the last traumatic moments of his young life during the trial after the defendants failed to take responsibility for their actions." The defendants acted together as a team. They had been looking for Ricard during the afternoon of Friday the 12th of April, and when they found him, they viciously attacked him. He didn't stand a chance. The court heard that on the day of the murder, Ricard had been at a friend's flat before leaving to meet his partner. Only a few minutes later, after leaving the flat, Ricard had been stabbed 13 times, and after the attack, Walcott and Marley immediately fled the scene. They then went to a pub where they ordered 3 pints of beer and started swigging it. As part of the investigation, officers viewed more than 100 hours of CCTV and were subsequently able to identify both Walcott and Marley. They were behind the murder of Ricard. A fast-paced manhunt was launched, and a few days later, officers were able to track Walcott to an address, and he was arrested, and Marley fled the country. He was arrested at Gatwick Airport upon his return and charged the following day, and they're due to be sentenced at a later date. Detectives are continuing to offer a reward of £10,000 for